Hey babes, it's Sophia. Just popping in for a little note to let you know that I am taking the month of March as a little break from the podcast. I've got you covered. We're going to pull some of the most favorite episodes, but also I want to share some of the underrated episodes that have a lot of the juicy stuff that I am finding myself repeating, not only in my coaching sessions, but on my free Spark calls. So maybe you've heard these before. I invite you to re-listen with a new ear. And if you haven't, then please do enjoy. They are a lovely visit into some of the skills that we need to master in order to have naked, sexy fun in our long term relationships. With that in mind, I just want to mention that I only have 7 spots left in the Naked Fun Comeback, which is my signature program to help you go from awkward and pressure filled sex or no sex to easy, comfortable, and consistent intimacy that feels good for you both. This iteration of the Naked Fun Comeback is essentially a 4-month coaching program. It comes with 4 months of curriculum that you can do in your spare time, I promise. It's 30-minute videos once a week for you to listen to on the private podcast or in the video stream, and minimum a 30-minute date night once a month, ideally once a week. So if you can listen to a 30-minute video or 30-minute lesson once a week, and you can do a 30-minute date night with your partner once a week, you are going to see progress. The magic is that right now only, I am still offering one-on-one coaching in this offer. So you get a customized journey through the curriculum. You get me in your pocket every single day, except for the weekends, helping you pivot when your initiation move went sideways, helping you process when your date night didn't go as planned, and helping you celebrate when things are going well. I am hearing such amazing things from my clients in the program. We've got a couple that interrupted their duty sex cycle that was happening for several years. They had an amazing weekend away. She wanted it. She was asking for more. They are debriefing on the regular and building a sex life that feels so good for them. And I even have men and higher libido partners who have joined the program alone, who are engaging their partners in connection, even if it's not intimate yet, for the first time in a while. And they now have a step-by-step process to follow with me coaching them by their side. So this is the most affordable this program is ever going to be, with the most access to me that you can ever get. Get in on one of those spots. If you can't find a time to book a coaching call with me, just DM me on Instagram or email me and let's get you sorted. I would really love to see you in there. And otherwise, really juicy things are coming for the Naked Fun Comeback program. I'm excited for everything that we're going to roll out later in the spring. That is all I've got to say. Without further ado, enjoy this week's episode, and I will talk to you soon. Welcome to the Sex After Kids podcast. Excited to have you here. Today we are all talking about sex ed, shitty sex ed, lack of sex ed. I want to hear your sex ed stories. I'll share a few of mine. But really what we're talking about is not the fact that sex education is a great TV show, but that the lack of sex education that you got is a big part of the puzzle when it comes to your lackluster sex life post kids, right? So during sex ed in high school, if we rewind ourselves, people like to freak us out about naked bodies and where babies came from. But otherwise, we didn't really talk about what broader sexuality meant. And there was no notion of pleasure, right? What is your first memory of sex education? What was the tone? How was sex talked about? It's definitely no secret that sex ed needs a revamp. To this day, we still teach sex ed like the only things that matter are not getting pregnant and not getting diseases. Shame and negativity are still often the tone, as well as silence. And that means that we bring that shame and negativity into the bedroom with us. So let's look at the 5 ways that sex education is still messing with your sex life and what you can do about it. Reason number 1 is that no one told you about how it's supposed to feel good. In fact, they made you feel like those sexual urges were something to be ashamed of and that giving into them would ruin your life. People have sex for pleasure most of the time. Occasionally, they do it to have babies. Your body was designed to feel good. It was designed to be touched and caressed. And sexual pleasure is good for you. I could go on forever. The short story here is that shame is a total buzzkill and it's guaranteed that it's holding you back from some really great orgasms in some probably not so small ways. Reason number two was that masturbation was probably not even mentioned, and they very likely skipped the detailed anatomy. Solo loving is the number one way to get satisfaction under the sheets. And if you don't know your own sexual landscape, it's pretty tough to ask for what you want and what you need. I learned this lesson the hard way. It was like one of the first pieces of sex advice that I remember getting, right? It was like, know yourself, know your body. And honestly, I never really understood fully what that meant. Like those generic pieces of advice that just like hit more deeply once the light bulb goes off. And once I started doing my Tantra training and once I started understanding what was working for me, I was like, oh, that's why masturbation is so important. Because when I know my own body, when I do some experimenting and observing and noticing and failing and learning, then I develop a lexicon with my own body about what speed feels good, what pressure feels good, what moves feel good, what locations feel good. And that is important information to share with the partner, right? Because we also have this concept that great lovers are supposed to be great, right? Mind readers, that they know how to just turn us on with no coaching or information. But the exact opposite is true, right? So, first of all, sex ed didn't tell us to explore our own bodies, but also it really held back on the actual detailed anatomy. So, when we get into the anatomy in sex ed, we talk about ovulation, we talk about the uterus, and we talk about all the parts, but we don't talk about the pleasure that all of those parts are designed for. We don't talk about the nerves that go from your brain to your genitals. There's four that create these pleasure superhighways that stimulate different parts of the brain that then create different flavors and kinds of orgasmic response. So you can blame yourself for not knowing these things and blame yourself for not knowing being a five-star lover. But if you've never actually cracked a book on sexual anatomy, like Sherry Winston's Anatomy of Arousal, or She Comes First, or Becoming Clitorate, all books that I will link in the show notes, Come As You Are. If you have never actually studied arousal in the body and how it works, you're going to have some pretty lame notions about how it works. And then on top of that, if you've never touched yourself, you're not going to have any sense of how those concepts apply to your specific body and your specific experiences. And I just want to note that this is like doubly true for women or basically anyone who's not a cis man. I think of this when growing up, like there's so many jokes about male masturbation. There's so many jokes about male ejaculation. There's like this comfort societally almost with the fact that like young men pleasure themselves and touch themselves regularly. And there actually isn't anything wrong with that. I think that's great, but we do not have the same lexicon for young women. We think of that as like mysterious, taboo, bad. It's wrong in a very different way than masturbation for young men can be. And so we end up with this experience where like guys or penis owners already have a more like visceral kind of physical connection with their penis. It's a thing that's outside of their body. They touch it every time they go to the washroom. When they get an erection, it is very obvious, sometimes to their massive embarrassment. My son, who's 3, has like a whole relationship with his penis. And vaginas and vulvas are just so much different. Even as a vagina and vulva owner, it's hard to look at it directly. You need like an army of mirrors and lights to like actually get a good go. And even if you got like a cell phone picture, it's like, it's just a whole thing. And even then, you're only looking at the external pleasure zones. There's so much going on internally. And on top of that, we're not taught. So it's very hard on a individual level to just like physical level have that relationship with your body. And then on top of that, you got this shame from society telling you not to do it, even though it is the very thing that will support you. If we add the context of having children, when the landscape has changed, when things have torn, when there's scar tissue, when things have shifted, when things have moved, when they have stretched, when they have shrunk, when they are sensitive in different ways, masturbating is one of the best ways that we can get back in touch with our new body and how our body works now so that we can communicate with our partner. Hey, the manual for this has changed. The map to the treasure has changed. Masturbation is how we find the way. So that's another way that sex ed has messed you up in the sense, or messed up your sex life in the sense that you were not encouraged to learn about sex and you were not encouraged to learn about masturbation, right? So masturbating is an important thing for both parties to do. And again, I guess there's also this taboo, like within marriage and within relationship, that if people are masturbating, it's because they're not being sexually satisfied by their partner. And I encourage us to also take it as a reframe. If we go back to or skip forward to the episode about tackling this as a team, what would it look like to have your partner actually fully support and protect time for you to go and masturbate so that when you came back together, sex could be better? What if your partner was like, I'm going to take the kids for the afternoon to the game center, to the park, to go swimming, to whatever. You've got the house to yourself. Do your thing, masturbate, play around. And then tonight or this weekend when we've got our sexy time, I want you to tell me everything that you discovered. And what if I were to do that for my partner, right? Like what a paradigm shift. And I can feel myself even still kind of squick at that notion a little bit, right? Okay. So we got a ton of shame and negativity. We didn't learn about anatomy. We were not encouraged to masturbate. Another way that sex ed really did us a dirty was that we probably didn't see ourselves represented. So most sex ed classes focus on one kind of sex, that is intercourse that involves a penis going into a vagina. And that's because we're so reproductively focused in sex ed, right? We stick to the biology part because that's what we feel the most comfortable teaching. But first off, even if you are in a heterosexual, monogamous, cis relationship, this is not the only way to give each other pleasure. If you happen to fall anywhere outside of the gender binary, outside of monogamy, and outside of heterosexuality, then you likely did not see yourself represented in the sex education courses that you saw. You probably did not see your urges. You did not see the types of relationships you were in. You didn't see your feelings, your questions, or your reality represented. You might still be questioning today if some of your desires are normal or okay. You may not have given yourself permission to explore fully, to be totally unleashed in who you are and in your pleasure. We are all worse off when we only see intercourse or like penis and vagina focused sex. There are so many yummy ways to please a human body. There are so many ways for us to love each other. And the truth is, it can be very unsafe in this world to still express that fully. That gets represented in the silencing and erasure of those kinds of relationships in sex education. And that is changing now. But an example could be, how, like, do you remember anyone ever talking about anal sex in your sex education classes? I was very lucky. I had a group of girlfriends in high school who are still my besties. And I don't know if I'm the one who led the charge. I have been giving advice about sex since before I was even having it, but we would regularly sit around and talk about sex. I was probably one of the only ones who wasn't in a relationship. And I distinctly remember doing a women's circle, which we wouldn't have called it back then, but doing the circle about anal, right? So like, what was each person's experience? Some people had had a very lovely, it just happened by accident and totally surprised them and was super wonderful. Other people felt a lot of pressure from their partner and it didn't go very well, or they learned the hard way that a lot of lube and a lot of time were needed. But when do young people get to have facilitated, supported conversations where they can share their experiences with actual knowledgeable people in the room who can course correct and provide the right information, right? A lot of youth turn to each other for sex advice, and that's okay, but we have to make sure that the people that are giving them advice are getting advice from good places, which is why we want to keep that line of communication open. Anyways, that is a side rant, but The bottom line is conversations about anal, conversations about dental dams and cunnilingus, conversations about fisting, conversations about rope tying, or just like anything on the sexual menu that does not include a penis going inside of a vagina are so limited. And so we don't even get a chance to talk about the STIs that happen in that situation, or how pregnancy can still happen in some of those situations. And as a result, we end up with a lot of queer young people who are pregnant, or who get STIs. But when we don't see ourselves represented, we don't see what's on the menu. And then the desires that we might have and the curiosities that we might have, if they aren't reflected back to us as like, yes, these are normal things that are on the menu, instead of, oh, these aren't on the menu, it's bad to be thinking about these things, creates again that sense of shame, that sense of erasure, that sense of weirdness and taboo around the kind of sex that we want to have. And so I'm sure, as not a LGBTQ2S person myself, but I think for all of us, we all process layers of that shame as we get older. We have different sexual experiences. We meet people who are less sexually repressed than us, and we have some experiences, and we broaden that menu. And still, I'm sure there are vestiges, there are leftovers of how sex education made an impression on us. And so when we can explore that a little bit through dialogue, through coaching, through somatics, we can start to see what little corners, or little boundaries are still remaining for us that we maybe want to press on, and see if we can open them and open the dimension of experience that we're having. Number 4 on the list of ways that sex ed got you all messed up is that they freaked you out about VD. Yep. They used to do the whole fear tactic thing. I'm sure most of you listening have sat through some kind of a lecture with gross, disgusting pictures of any kind of venereal disease or sexual transmitted infection that you can think of. And that fear, whether it's top of mind or low on the back burner of your brain, definitely does not help you get into a relaxed state that is optimal for orgasms. So the times have changed, and we do talk more about these in a different way. Most, if not all, sexually transmitted infections are now either treatable or curable. And if they're not curable, they are manageable. Even HIV at this point can be managed if people have access to medication. And getting tested regularly, obviously, is a big part of that. Now, this can be a little bit different for those of us who are in long-term relationships or married. But it's an interesting one. Like, on the one hand, I would say STIs are not something that I think about very much anymore, because I've been with my partner for a very long time. And at the same time, if we're in a relationship that's feeling tenuous, maybe there's been a history of infidelity in our relationship, or maybe we're polyamorous. And so there are, multiple partners happening regularly in our relationship, then STIs might be something that's on your radar. And I would also argue that birth control can kind of have the same effect. So just like they tried to put the fear of God into us about getting a venereal disease, as they used to call them, or an STI, they really tried to put the fear of God into us about getting pregnant. And I would say certainly in this realm of having sex with your partner after kids, that one of the big light bulbs for me was when I had my first daughter. I was like, oh, I kind of had this assumption that like birth control wouldn't be a thing I needed to deal with anymore after I had children. But actually, I do still have to deal with it. And it's actually almost more important than ever for me until I go through menopause and can no longer make babies, unless I decide to get my tubes tied. So birth control and like fear and worry about getting pregnant can weigh on us in a huge way. And I'll actually share that, like, I'll do a whole other episode on this when we talk about birth control post kids. But my husband got a vasectomy, which was awesome. We'll have to interview him about it. And he was pretty nervous at first, and not super keen, but definitely game to take his turn. But I would have to say that after we got through the hurdle and the recovery, and then we were like sure that nothing was happening down there anymore, He is a 100% proponent now of vasectomies because he can see how much more relaxed I am about our sex life because I'm not worried about us getting pregnant, even with a condom. So now we can do our thing, and there's less worry that a surprise baby is going to come along and we're going to have to deal with a surprise abortion or not or whatever. And that has visibly relaxed me during sex. So it's not something to discount, right? Like these worries or fears about sex, even if they come from like 25 years ago, they can hang on in the deep recesses of our brains and hold us back, right? Anything that's activating that fight or flight system that's getting us out of a relaxed state is going to be getting in the way of how we're feeling and how present we are and how much we're enjoying ourselves, right? Okay. So my very last way that sex ed did you a dirty is that they did not give you the tools to actually talk about sex. And I know consent is huge these days. It wasn't really so much back in the day, and people can get all complicated about it. But consent, really at its heart, is just about an ability to check in with yourself and what you want, an ability to check in with the other person to make sure that they want it too, and to hear each other. And we go, yeah, easy peasy. But like, this actually takes vulnerability and ninja level communication skills, things we're naturally born with, right? No, it is very tough to lay bare our desires and to put them out there for someone to respond to. And hearing a no can feel awful. But having sex that we don't want or that our partner doesn't want is definitely even worse. The main point here is that there's no emphasis on the social skills part, the relational part of sex when we are growing up. There is a very delicate, caring, nuanced dance that needs to happen that takes a level of maturity. And this is why so much sexual assault happens for young people. Most sexual assault happens in younger populations, like high school age populations. And some of that is from young people being groomed and abused by adults, but some of that is just from young people fumbling around in the dark, trying to do this thing that their body's keen to do without the tools to do it. And the unfortunate part of that is that a lot of people get hurt along the way to small and large degrees, men included. Basically, everyone I feel gets harmed in this process. That leaves its own, what do you want to say, like imprint and like trail behind it that we need to deal with. But it also puts us in a situation where most of you, when I am finally talking to you, you are just so fed up about not being able to talk about this. You're fed up with not having the language to talk about it. You're fed up with not knowing what's going on. And you're fed up with just feeling stuck in silence and not being able to even just broach a conversation with your partner that this is not the sex life that you wanted. You are very much struggling to identify as women in particular. And this is where we go back to the masturbation piece, like struggling to even name what you want. So your partner's like, tell me what you want. And you're like, I don't know what would feel good. You're just supposed to magically know and touch me in the right ways, right? So we end up with a total breakdown where, first of all, we can't create the kind of sex life that we want if we're unable to talk about it. And second of all, we can continue to perpetuate harm. We can continue to hurt each other, essentially, when we're stuck in that silence, stuck in freeze, stuck in a fawn response, and going along with the sex that's happening because we don't have any other tools for how to deal with it. And it's easy to kind of say, well, just communicate better. But there's actually several different skills that are required in that, from interoception and like self connection to communication to managing rejection. And we all do that differently, right? So, in summary, when you're leaving today's episode, this is another great starting point for starting a conversation with your partner about your sex life. If you are struggling to do that, is just to swap some memories, man. Think about your sex ed. I personally have almost no memory of high school level sex ed other than the biology of conception. I have a very clear memory of puberty sex ed in grade 5, where the guys went into one room, the girls went into another. And the most visceral memory for me of that was we were talking about periods, we were going through period products. And my aunt, actually, who was my teacher, took a tampon, opened it up, took it out of the applicator, and put it into a cup of water, and it like exploded and filled full of water, right? And I remember because the first time I did use a tampon, which was like a whole fucking thing in high school, we were going on a backpacking trip and my mom insisted that I use one because the bears were going to smell me and it was a whole thing and like actually quite traumatic. But I remember taking it out the first time and being like, it does not look at all like the tampon that got filled up with that water in that puberty lesson because there's just not as much liquid. Anyways, so, swapping stories with your partner about what kind of sex ed you remember, or, if we're not talking formal sex ed, like, did you have a parent that sat you down and talked with you about these things? Did you have a parent who, like, left a book on your bed for you to go through? I don't remember a book. I remember my mom asking me a lot and me shying away from the conversation. I remember finding a lot of, like, feminist books on my mom's shelves, and had there been a, like, The ABCs of Sex, I likely would have read it, but I don't remember finding one, or, like, maybe Our Bodies, Ourselves or something like that. But I do remember not I don't know if I guess this would kinda count as sex ed. I do remember my girlfriend house sitting one year in grade 12, and we found a Letters to Penthouse book at someone's house, and we, like, sat around the kitchen table and drank our, like, Mike's Hard Lemonade and read these stories out loud to each other, which was hilarious, and we had so much fun with it. But it was also very interesting, right? Because it's an exposure to people's fantasies. There was some cheating stories, there was some wet t-shirt contest stories. And so it's an introduction to like the panoply of the way that people think about sex. And I remember probably in our like mid 20s, none of us had ever really watched porn before. So we like rented some porn and oh my God, it was terrible and hilarious and mostly enlightened us about why some of the men that we had met had sex the way they did, if that's where they were learning from, right? So, those are some of my stories. I'd love to hear your stories. You can send me in the DMs or you can comment. But this is also a wonderful way to have a more abstract conversation with your partner about what you've learned about sex, either through experiences like mine, or maybe you had an amazing lover as somewhere along the line who taught you something. Or maybe you had an experience. Like I remember hooking up with an old partner of mine, like a decade later, we had this one night stand. And I just remember leaving that interaction, realizing like how much I had grown sexually, how much more confident I was, how much more in my body I was. And that was partially because in contrast, he was so uncomfortable in his body. He was so unable to get present with me. He was so rushing through the whole thing, which was really interesting. So, thanks for listening to me ramble today about sex ed. We want to remember that sex is a joyful, wonderful, pleasurable thing, that our body was designed for this wonderful pleasure, that exploring our bodies and exploring our partners' bodies is the name of the game. This is not about performance. This is about exploration. We'll talk about that more in future episodes. That you may have not seen yourself represented, or you may have not seen versions of you represented, right? I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole about how a lot of cis straight women have like lesbian and queer fantasy. And a lot of cis straight men have sex with other men. They don't identify as gay, but they have sex with other men, right? So there's so much in that panoply of representation. We could talk about folks with disabilities. We could talk about folks who are asexual or who don't feel a lot of sexual attraction to folks. There's so much there that most of us have not explored because only one version of sexuality has been portrayed to us. And communication is the name of the game, friends, and we will talk about it a lot here on the pod. Thank you so much for listening today. I want you to share with me your worst and your best sex ed stories. I can't wait to hear them. Maybe we'll do an episode where we share some. That would be so great. And I'll catch you next time.